there he was, sobs muffled by blankets, absorbing tears that stung his eyes, curled and contorted, hair ruffled and nose dripping with snot, a deep sorrow embedded in each tendril of mucus seeping into his skin. How could this happen to me? Again and again he screamed. Every fucking time life kicks me again and again. And no one was there to hear. Why, God, why must you torment me? With each yelp the boy fell further into sorrow, the all-consuming hellscape of misery. He curled up tighter, knees pushing into his stomach, nails digging into his skin, sobbing and sobbing and sobbing, rotting in his snot-ridden, tear-filled, spit-saturated river of helplessness. He awoke the next morning and looked in the mirror and saw you. Yes, you. You watching this video right now. You who blames the world for all your troubles. And me who used to cry myself to sleep like vermin, a rat, and nothing more. Like a victim, some powerless child. Nothing but a child. Me and you and all of us, hoping our problems will be resolved by some fictitious god or bullshit. Rotting in our meager minds, throwing away dreams and ambitions, and most importantly, our power. Come, join me, my friends, and let us unmask our eyes, let us see the light, and let us throw off our ignorance. It is time to see the truth. Maybe this is just me, but I've noticed a sort of growing sense of apathy or helplessness and powerlessness, especially amongst the young generation. All I could say is in America and the Western nations or whatever it might be. A lot of people complaining and yelling at their phones or tweeting bullshit or just blaming these nebulous entities like the government or the education institutions or whatever it might be for their problems or issues. But just generally people relinquishing responsibility of their lives to other entities, to other people, to other things, and ultimately becoming victims. I want to preface with two things. Number one is the world is far from perfect, and there are a lot of issues that governments and institutions can create or propagate, but this doesn't mean that they are to blame for every evil that exists. And number two is maybe this is a problem that has happened forever. People not taking responsibilities for their life, people blaming others. Maybe this is more of a fact of human nature rather than a sign of our times. But nonetheless, what I want to talk about today, and what I think is very, very important, is this sense of apathy and powerlessness. Because when I look back at my life, when I was 16 and I was really overweight and I used to cry myself to sleep because some girl or some friend rejected me, I felt like a victim. I felt powerless. And I felt this intense sense of dread and apathy and inability to change the world. And it wasn't until I took responsibility for my life and realized that no one is going to save me but me, and I cannot let my circumstances bar me from becoming the person I want to be. Until I accepted that fact, my life didn't get better. So today, my friends, I want to show you the truth. The truth that we are living in the greatest century ever. Because never before have you been able to order Chinese food and Japanese food and Thai cuisine and Mexican or whatever you could think of simply at the click of a fingertips, right? We have more cuisines and foods available to us in the 21st century than the 19th century kings and queens. Or the fact that every single book or movie or television show or piece of media ever created and recorded in human history is accessible at the mere click of a fingertip. We are living in an incredible time, and I don't think we're taking advantage of that. So today, my friends, we're going to be diving into taking back control of our lives, becoming the arbiters of our own fate, and realizing the truth of our freedom. So, existentialism started in the 19th century with Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard. He emphasized human subjectivity, our irrational tendencies, and the importance of individual choice. Nietzsche then expanded on this with the concept of the Übermensch, specifically the fact that we must choose our own values. He's very famous for the phrase amor fati, or the idea of love of fate, pointing out the human obligation to celebrate and love one's life. Now, I'm being a bit reductionist here, so please keep that in mind. But the general attitude of Nietzsche is one of independence, self-creation, and humanism. Then comes the 20th century, okay? And this is really where existentialism, as we'll discuss today, is really important. So, it became popular post-World War II with Sartre and many other French intellectuals, right? Europe was in absolute shambles. The worst human atrocities ever committed happened. Millions of dead Jews, gypsies, and minorities lined the streets of Europe, their guts and limbs embedded in the asphalt of ashy skies. Atomic bombs dropped upon Japan, incinerating cities within seconds as layers of skin peeled off young Japanese children fleeing the fires. And beyond that, monuments in ruins and centuries of history demolished and razed, ravaged by gunpowder and grenades all across Europe. And France specifically had it bad. The economic instability during the Great Depression, the quick defeat by the Nazis in 1940, and dealings with the Reich left an awful aftertaste for French citizens. There was moral murkiness and nihilism run amok the citizens, many feeling helpless to the tyrants that governed. So, French intellectuals like Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, Camus, and others met in cafes, philosophizing about human freedom, the individual, society, and our moral obligations. And thus, modern existentialism was born. In its purest sense, existentialism is a philosophy emphasizing human freedom, the capacity to change, and the individual as the director of his or her life. The core remark that existence precedes essence, which we'll expand upon later, means that man's essence, his definitions, and the things that make him uniquely him are his own to determine. He must exist first, and then he creates himself into what he wants to be. From Sartre, first of all, man exists, turns up, appears on the scene, and only afterward defines himself. Not only is man what he conceives himself to be, but he is also only what he wills himself to be after this thrust towards experience. Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. Man is put onto this world. His opinion of himself is the only right opinion, the only true opinion of himself. And then he chooses what his life will be. And you might ask, what's the point of all this warbling and bullshit? I mean, isn't this kind of obvious? Well, yes, but it's also important to point out our own subjectivity, right? From Sartre again, existentialism's first move is to make man aware of what he is and to make the full responsibility of his existence rest on him. Sartre here is saying that you're in charge and you better not fucking forget it. One of the strong points about existentialism, in my view, is this emphasis on the individual, on the person, and also the sort of secularism that comes with it. Sartre also quotes Dostoevsky said, "If God didn't exist, everything would be possible." And that is the very starting point of existentialism. Indeed, everything is permissible if God does not exist. And as a result, man is forlorn, because neither within him nor without does he find anything to cling to. He can't start making excuses. In other words, there is no determinism. Man is free. Man is freedom. Now, you might be an atheist, a devout Catholic, or somewhere in between. But regardless of your religion or belief system, without God, it's really hard to say morality would exist. A sense of good or bad wouldn't be objective without some omniscient, omnipresent being involved, whether it's a sky daddy or some idea of karma. Thus, if there is no God, which is an attitude we must take seriously in increasingly nihilistic and potentially even non-religious world, then we must make ourselves the arbiters of our own fate. We must use our own freedom to craft our own sense of morality, our own definitions of right and wrong. And if we do not, then what are we doing? And now Sartre mentions the big boy that we're going to come back to constantly, and which is very relevant to the beginning of this video. Our condemnation to freedom. Because the lack of God or objective morality means we must choose our values. And it isn't a choice to choose, it's a necessity. Quote, "We are alone with no excuses." This is the ideal I shall try to convey when I say that man is condemned to be free. Condemned because he did not create himself, yet in other respects is free. Because once thrown into this world, he is responsible for everything he does. Therefore, the existentialist thinks that man, with no support and no aid, is condemned every moment to invent man. Ponget, in a very fine article, has said, "Man is the future of man." That's exactly it. Us human beings are in a constant state of becoming, of choosing what type of life we'll live, of choosing what values we hold to be true, and this is a never-ending process. Sartre calls us humans beings for themselves, or beings that exist in a constant state of flux and change, always defining their essence and the things that make them them. And these types of beings for themselves transcend their facticity. Wait. Let's back up a second. In Sartre's perspective of the world, there are two types of beings or objects in this world. There are beings in themselves, and there are beings for themselves. Beings in themselves, like tables, chairs, staplers, and whatever else, exist in someone's mind before coming into existence. Tables have a set of characteristics, like having legs and a flat surface. Now, tables can be green or blue or have 10 legs or 3 legs, but they have certain essential features which must exist, and without these, they wouldn't be tables. And this is their essence, right? For beings in themselves, essence precedes existence. The carpenter must think of a table or a chair before creating one. Next is beings for themselves, i.e. humans. We have control of our own fate. We can craft our own fate because we are condemned to the freedom that we touched upon earlier. And this is known as transcending our facticity. And what is facticity, you might ask? Well, we're born into this world speaking a certain language and living in a certain town and practicing a certain religion. This is our facticity. But we can rise above and change that. We can learn new languages and go to different schools and move to new cities and ultimately transcend the circumstances we are born into. However, big problems arise when we ignore this freedom and deny our capacity to carve our own future. Sartre calls this bad faith, the denial of our innate freedom of choice. We must remember that a human being is in a constant state of becoming. And when you act in bad faith, denying your capacity to change and lying to yourself, you treat your future self who makes decisions like an object. You say to yourself, I cannot change my life, or there's no way I'll ever become fit and the person I'd like to be. This treats your future self like an object, a being which exists and cannot change, a being in itself, ultimately denying your becoming, your ability to construct your own fate, and your ability to be a being for itself. When you deny such an ability to craft one's narrative, you deny your very existence, you deny your very beingness, and to be in bad faith is to say, I am who I am, and I will never change in the future. And how many of us are living in this bad faith? We take on the roles of a college kid, going about our little finance internships and silly LinkedIn headshots and all that resume shit. We bitch and moan and complain, repressing our inner desires to be artists, or write novels, or pick up a guitar, lying to ourselves, denying our freedom, and ultimately hating the existences we are living. And you might say, oh, I'm just being a good son, or this is what I'm supposed to do, taking on social roles like an actor takes on a role. But is this true? Do you have to do these things? No. You are making a choice to do the internships and the emails and taking on the roles and all that shit. So if you dislike it, if you are annoyed by it, if you complain about it, change it. Do not deny your freedom. Do not deny your capacity to change. Do not deny the human condition, because once you do, treating yourself like a mere object that cannot transcend its facticity, you outsource your life to something else, to someone else, and you become a slave to the world. Bad faith is a denial of our innate freedom and capacity to change. It treats ourselves like a mere object with strict definitions and unmalleable structure. And to do this, to deny our absolutely free condition, is the greatest human sin of all. My friends, as long as you're alive, you're free. And what are some modern denials of freedom and acts of bad faith we all commit? Well, let's look at social media, for an example. Nearly everyone I've met says, I wish I spent less time on TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram and whatever. And my response is often, okay, why don't you? And they'll say, oh, I'm a teenager, and this is how my friends communicate, and they send me messages and memes and all that, so I really can't get off. Really? You can't, or you won't. There's a big difference between the two. And how many of us blame past experiences as quote-unquote trauma? We say, my dad treated me this way, or my first boyfriend never made me feel truly loved, or my mom used to yell at me for doing X. And yes, these things happened, and a lot of us have had many awful things happen to us, but the story we tell ourselves imprison us. Just because you got rejected at 16 and think you're unlovable doesn't mean you have to be an asshole to people who try and get close. I'm looking at myself for this one. We outsource our freedom to shit in the past, calling it in the name of Freud or Jung or psychoanalytic bullshit. And ultimately, we hate our lives because we imprison ourselves in stories that we tell ourselves. My friends, we are always free. And the more we deny this freedom, the deeper nihilism and sadness and complaining and pitiful lives we create for ourselves. We flee our freedom, we flee taking control of our lives because it's burdensome. To say we're free means we're in control and there are no excuses for us living a life we hate. But this means we can also change our lives if we take responsibility for them. We can empower ourselves, and we are not playthings chained to our fates, but we are actively creating our fates. And I think there's one man who exemplifies this notion best. One man who needs a bit more celebration in today's culture. Born a slave, turned into an American hero, Frederick Douglass is the epitome of a man with no bad faith. With shackles around his feet, he freed himself and became someone truly legendary. In fact, he was the most photographed man of the 19th century, and for a damn good reason. Here's what William Lloyd Garrison, a fellow abolitionist, had to say. I shall never forget his first speech at the convention, the extraordinary emotion it excited in my own mind, the applause which followed from beginning to end of his felicitous remarks. I think I never hated slavery so intensely as that moment. There stood one, in physical proportion and stature, commanding and exact, an intellect richly endowed, in natural eloquence a prodigy, in soul manifestly created but a little lower than the angels, yet a slave, aye, a fugitive slave, capable of high attainments as an intellectual and moral being, needing nothing but a comparatively small amount of cultivation to make him an ornament to society and a blessing to his race. And that, my friends, is William Lloyd Garrison, from Preface to Narrative of a Slave by Frederick Douglass. Douglass was born around 1817. He was separated from his mother at a very early age and lived on a Maryland plantation. And the conditions he described were fucking awful. I have often been awakened at the dawn of day by the most heart-rending shrieks of an own aunt of mine, whom he used to tie up to a joist and whip upon her naked back till she was literally covered with blood. No words, no tears, no prayers from his gory victim seemed to move his iron heart from its bloody purpose. The louder she screamed, the harder he whipped. And where the blood ran fastest, there he whipped longest. He would make her scream, and he would whip her to make her hush. Not until overcome by fatigue would he cease to swing the blood-clotted cowskin. And not only were the conditions of slavery just fucking atrocious, but the world around Douglass treated blacks as less than human. For example, Douglass recounts of one fellow slave being shot in the river by a slave master, guts and brains splattered on the tree bark, yet the man who did it was let free. And in fact, nothing bad happened at all. In fact, he was practically given a raise. In the 19th century South, where Douglass grew up, the worse you treated slaves, the more famous you were, and the lower you stooped, the more you were celebrated. Fucking atrocious. The conditions of slavery were undoubtedly awful, and Douglass has every reason to cry and complain and give up. But when he's sent to Baltimore, this begins his journey to freedom. He takes control of his life, spits in the eyes of fate, and fight for what he believes in. And she kindly taught me the ABC. What the? Holy shit, what the? Yo, come on. Pick up. Oh, what's up? Remember that Frederick Douglass book I was reading? Right? Remember that? Alright, so, dude, listen to this shit. This guy is crazy. He fucking learned to read from his master's wife, teaching him like the preliminary ABCs, super simple shit, right? But then listen to this shit. So the master comes home, right? And by the way, he's in Baltimore, so they're a little bit more lax here. The master comes home, sees his wife teaching his slave the ABCs, and guess what he does? He fucking flips. He scolds Frederick Douglass, he scolds his wife, he punishes them, and it's this big hurrah, right? This big event, and everything just goes to shit, right? Just as Douglass is about to get a little bit of, grip, a little bit of semblance, a little bit of power and competency and control, right? Now, listen to how Douglass responds. Dude, this shit is crazy. From that moment on, I understood the pathway from slavery to freedom. It was just what I wanted, and I got it at a time when I least expected it. Though conscious of the difficulty of learning without a teacher, I set out with the high hope and a fixed purpose, at whatever the cost of trouble, to learn how to read. What he, talking about his slave master, most dreaded, that I most desired. And the argument which he so warmly urged against my learning to read only served me with a desire and determination to learn. Dude, it's fucking sick. It's like, even when Frederick Douglass was at his lowest, right? When for the first time, he gets a chance to learn to read and gain some competence, and he's shot down. He said, fuck that. He didn't let his circumstances stop him, right? He continued to learn how to read, he continued to learn how to write, he continued his journey towards freedom, becoming this like incredible abolitionist, but it all started from not letting his circumstances hold him back from becoming the person he wanted to be. Fuck, man, that's inspiring. So yeah, Douglass learned the ABCs, got scolded by his master, but was committed to continue. And even though he couldn't learn conventionally, he didn't let that stop him. He tasted freedom and savored each of its juices. For example, one thing I love is how high agency Douglass is. In order to further his reading and writing, he would find poor white boys in the streets of Baltimore, bring his tiny little books and a pen and paper, and trade morsels of bread for them to teach him words. Here's a quote from Douglass. "This bread I used to bestow upon hungry little urchins, who in return would give me that more valuable bread of knowledge." And this sort of resourcefulness is just absolutely magical, right? How many of us in the 21st century bitch and moan and complain that we don't have the resources to pursue our projects? We procrastinate, screaming we don't have the money or the education or whatever to make our little films or paint or do the work that we need to do. But resourcefulness is the mark of any good entrepreneur, creator, or anyone who does something worthwhile. Just listen to James Cameron, one of the greatest directors of our generation, who created Titanic and the 2 Avatar movies and a lot more awesome films. Just listen to how he learned filmmaking.
used to do is I was working as a truck driver. On the weekends, I'd drive down to USC. I lived in Los Angeles.
Right.
Or I lived in Orange County at the time.
A truck driver?
Yeah, I was a truck driver. I'd drive down to USC. I'd go in, and for the cost of the Xeroxing, I would Xerox all these like doctoral dissertations on optical printing and film stock, film emulsions, and all that stuff. Build up these big binders of like how everything was done. I was like a total gearhead. So I gave myself like a full college education for about $120.
Wow.
So you're saying while you were a truck driver,
Yeah.
you were just fascinated with sort of how they did special effects and that kind of stuff, but it was a hobby for you.
Yeah, it was a hobby.
Awesome. Now back to Douglass. Douglass got his hand on a book called The Columbian Orator, a collection of speeches and writings from Benjamin Franklin, Napoleon, George Washington, and other legendary orators and rhetoricians. Basically, it's a magnum opus on persuasion in speech making, and here's what he had to say about the empowering book. Every opportunity I got, I used to read this book. Among much of the other interesting matter, I found in it a dialogue between a master and his slave. The slave was represented as having run away from his master 3 times. The dialogue represented the conversation which took place between them when the slave was retaken the 3rd time. In this dialogue, the whole argument in behalf of slavery was brought forward by the master, all of which was disposed of by the slave. The slave was made to say some very smart as well as impressive things in reply to his master, things which had the desired though unexpected effect, for the conversation resulted in the voluntary emancipation of the slave on the part of the master. In the same book, I met with one of Sheridan's mighty speeches on and in behalf of Catholic emancipation. These were choice documents to me. I read them over and over and over again with unabated interest. They gave tongue to interesting thoughts of my own soul, which had frequently flashed through my mind and died away for any want of utterance. The moral which I gained from the dialogue was the power of truth over the conscience of even a slaveholder. What I got from Sheridan was a bold denunciation of slavery and a powerful vindication of human rights. The reading of these documents enabled me to utter my thoughts and to meet the arguments brought forward to sustain slavery. But while they relieved me of one difficulty, they brought on another, even more painful than the one I was relieved. The more I read, the more I was led to abhor and detest my enslavers. And I just fucking love this, alright? Because Frederick Douglass, just like many other greats, stumbled across a story and clung to it. He learned from those more experienced than him, for example, Benjamin Franklin and Napoleon and all these works in the Columbian Orator, and pursued a similar path. And this is very common amongst high agency people, entrepreneurs and creators who cling to books and stories that move them. For the film director Christopher Nolan, he fell in love with Star Wars at 6 or 7 years old, and then as a result wanted to recreate that feeling, and thus pursued films. Steve Jobs, when he was young, got into electronics and was fascinated with how they worked, and we all know what he did. And Quentin Tarantino, personally one of my favorite directors, used to spend his weekends binging movies instead of being with friends and family. His mom couldn't afford childcare, so the movie theater was the next best option. And then comes to one of my favorite writers, George R.R. Martin, who was deeply influenced by Have Spacesuit, Will Travel by Robert Heinlein, and Conan by Robert E. Howard.
Who are the people who influenced you that you were reading when you were a kid? Because I read a ton when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah. Well, there was the first science fiction book I ever read was Have Spacesuit Will Travel by Robert A. Heinlein.
Of course, yeah.
Amazing.
Cat Who Walked Through Walls, stuff like all those juvenile series.
Yeah.
Armor in the Sky.
Citizen of the Galaxy, the Rolling Stones, all of Heinlein. Andre Norton was also very good. And, of course, in fantasy, I started off with Conan, Robert E. Howard. the old Lancer editions, you know. I think I was reading them when I was like
Did they have
12, 13.
Did they have like sexy ladies on the front and him, like the Frazetta images of Conan on the front?
Yeah, definitely. Frazetta standing on a pile of, Conan standing on a pile of corpses. And Conan would always fight a giant snake, and there would be a scantily clad dancing girl. And then I encountered Tolkien, who puzzled me at first because it was like a birthday party. And then
What do you mean? Like the
when Fellowship of the Ring, it begins with a birthday party,
a long expected party, yeah.
and there's no dancing girls or giant snakes.
No,
I was
you don't
saying-
know who's having sex with who. In
No,
that.
I say, where?
New elves come from someplace, but you can't figure out how they do it.
So at first I wasn't really sure about Tolkien, but when I got into it, by the time we got to Rivendell and the Black Riders, and I was in love. And then when The Mines of Moria, I said, this is the best book ever written, and this is magnificent.
And back to Martin, he was inspired by Tolkien's deep histories, attention to detail, and real cultures that you could understand and relate with. And most importantly, Tolkien's subversion of expectations with starting a fantasy book with a calm birthday party for the Hobbit. This love of subverting expectations is one of George Martin's greatest skills. I mean, if you've read or seen Game of Thrones, you know that really the main protagonist, Eddard Stark, dies quite early on. And Martin is constantly killing off other characters and complicating storylines and subverting expectations, keeping readers absolutely fascinated. And just like Douglass, Martin was greatly inspired by earlier works. So, my friends, when your motivation runs dry, find stories to cling to. Now, back to Frederick Douglass. After this run-in with the Columbian orator, Douglass became obsessed with the idea of freedom. Quote, "The silver trump of freedom had roused my soul to eternal wakefulness. Freedom now appeared to disappear no more forever. It was heard in every sound and seen in everything. It was present to torment me with a sense of my wretched condition. I saw nothing without seeing it. I heard nothing without hearing it, and felt nothing without feeling it. It looked from every star, it smiled in every calm, breathed in every wind, and moved in every storm." I think a lot of us, especially as young people, excuse apathy or boredom or not taking control of our lives because we, quote unquote, haven't found our passion. And I think the fallacy or the problem with this perspective here is that passion doesn't just stumble upon us. We have to actively search and find it. You see, passion doesn't come to persuasive people. Robert Greene, a very famous author who wrote the 48 Laws of Power and many other books, discusses the idea of life's task in his 5th book, Mastery. And please remember this closely.
Most important thing that you can discover or learn, which is what I call your life's task. And the idea is simple. You were born as an individual, completely unique. The DNA that comprises who you are has never existed in the millions of years of evolution and will never exist in the future. It is completely who you are. Your experiences as you grow up from 1 year on is unique in the world. Nobody ever in the past or future will have exactly your experiences, exactly your parents, etc. That marks you as an individual, completely unique. It's like a seed that's planted at your birth, right? And if you cultivate that seed, if you cultivate that uniqueness, you discover your life's task, and you have success and power, and money will come to you, and your life will be fulfilled. And if you don't, to any degree, if you completely fail in that, then you're going to have the opposite. You're going to have a life of a lot of suffering and unhappiness and dissatisfaction. But the question always arises, how do I find my life's task? Robert, I really have no idea. The first thing I say is, it all depends on the level of your desire, which is true of anything in life. If you really, really want something, if you really love it, if it's really important to you, you will find the energy, you will find the answer. But if you're only kind of half interested in it, if you're only kind of teased by the idea, if you're intrigued by it, it's not enough. You'll never have the energy to go the search of discovering your life's task. So I tell you, you have to love this idea. You have to love that unique person in you, as if it's like an actual human being that you love.
Your life's task will not hit you in the face. So please look to your past, find what resonated, and pursue it doggedly. Douglass is becoming more proficient at reading and writing, stealing books and pencils from his master when he isn't looking. But just as things start to seem a little rosier, everything falls through. Douglass is sent back to the Maryland plantations to become a field hand once again, now under the whip of Mr. Covey, a renowned and bloodthirsty slave breaker. In Douglass's words, I was broken in body, soul, and spirit. My natural elasticity was crushed, my intellect languished, the disposition to read departed, the cheerful spark that lingered about my eye died, the dark night of slavery closed in upon me, and behold a man transformed into a brute. And here's a major lesson, guys. Not only will your journey be difficult, but you'll have to eat shit over and over and over again. Just as you think you found some footing and are making progress, you'll fall, you'll fail, you'll make a mistake, and you'll feel like shit. For example, but despite this situation, Douglass refused to submit to the atrocities of slavery. Bro, tell me, you been reading anything interesting?
The fuck did you just say? Reading? Oh, do I look like bloody Shakespeare? I don't fucking know, bro. I thought, maybe you'd have a smidge of culture in you, innit? You got fucking Doc Martens, you wear good shit, I thought... My bad, though. My bad, I'm dealing with a fucking heathen here. Remember that, Freddy Douglass thing I was reading, right? The Freddy Douglass thing, the American slave shit I was telling you about. I showed up, yes, I remember your fucking Freddy Douglass shit. Yeah, okay, so turns out, Freddy Douglass, he's sent back to Maryland, okay? He used to live in Baltimore, which is also in fucking Maryland, but he's sent back to the plantation, alright? And my boy Freddy Douglass, alright, he gets sent back, he's got to, pick cotton and fucking get whipped and all that bullshit all over again after he learned how to bloody read. Boy taught himself how to fucking read, but he comes back, he's put in Maryland, and you know what? He has the worst fucking slave master ever. Worst bloke you'd ever fucking see. Fucking prick this guy is. Alright, but this is what Freddy Douglass does. One day, Thomas Covey, this fucking awful slave master, pulls him around, brings him to the farm and says, I'm gonna fucking whip you to shreds, Freddy. But this is fucking insane. This is fucking gold, mate. Freddy Douglass looked at this motherfucker in the eye and somehow he doesn't know what took over him. He doesn't know. Has no bloody idea. But some spirit fucking possessed my man Douglass. And he looks in this guy's eye, takes off his fucking glasses, spits in his eye, knocks him in the jaw, and starts fucking wailing on him. It's a fucking boo, boo. It's a bloody gore, this shit. It's like fucking fight night in the UFC. Douglass is wailing on him. He's beating this motherfucker up. It takes 3 goddamn men, 3 men to pull fucking Douglass out of the pit. And now the slave master, this motherfucker, he's known all around because he never gets hit. He never gets broken by a fucking slave. But this white prick, bloody, fucking gore everywhere, blood and snot and brains on the fucking farm floor. This guy, guess what he does? Guess what happens to Freddy Douglass after this fucking shit? After he fights for himself, after he fights for his fucking freedom, guess what happens to him? Not a goddamn thing. Not a bloody fucking thing. Because this bloke, Freddy fucking Douglass, fought for his freedom. And you know what? How can this slave breaker be known for being broken by a slave? So Douglass never gets fucking touched again. Never gets the crack of the whip ever fucking again. It's crazy, isn't it? God damn, bro. This shit's inspiring. Freddy fucking Douglass. Slave turned goddamn slave breaker. Oh shit. Oh my god. God, I run on a marathon or some shit. This shit's fucking sick. Yeah. Hey bro, you wanna go for a little toke real quick? Oh yeah. Let's fucking go. Yeah.
My friends, this is pure gold. Because even in the worst of circumstances, in the greatest and heaviest of chains, we must fight for our freedom. For our freedom to choose our lives. For our freedom to construct our own fate. We humans, we all have a all is lost moment in our lives. Maybe it's after getting fired from a job, maybe it's after a partner cheats on us for the second time, and maybe it's happening right now because it's 12 a.m. and you're curled into the fetal position with ice cream dripping down your chin. But it doesn't fucking matter, because we must continue. After Douglass fights back against Mr. Covey and gains a bit more inner confidence and freedom, he begins to teach the other slaves how to read and write. Quote, every minute they spent in that school, they are liable to be taken up, to be given 39 lashes. They came because they wished to learn. Their minds had been starved by their cruel masters. They had been shut up in mental darkness. I taught them because it was the delight of my soul to be doing something that looked like the bettering the condition of my race. My friends, when we do something meaningful, something that betters the human race and we know it, we can withstand any amount of pain. As Nietzsche famously said, the man with a strong enough why can bear almost any how. So many of us are apathetic and commit acts of bad faith because we think we cannot change the world. We think we are powerless. And we think the world is immutable. And how wrong we are. I'll let Steve Jobs take the mic because I think he said it best.
The thing I would say is, when you grow up, you tend to get told that the world is the way it is, and your life is just to live your life inside the world, try not to bash into the walls too much, try to have a nice family life, have fun, save a little money. But life, that's a very limited life. Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact, and that is everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it. You can influence it. You can build your own things that other people can use. And the minute that you understand that you can poke life and actually something will, if you push in, something will pop out the other side. You can change it. You can mold it. That's maybe the most important thing, is to shake off this erroneous notion that life is there and you're just going to live in it, versus embrace it, change it, improve it, make your mark upon it. I think that's very important. And however you learn that, once you learn it, you'll want to change life and make it better, because it's kind of messed up in a lot of ways. Once you learn that, you'll never be the same again.
So now we've got Frederick Douglass, a former slave separated from his mother at birth, beaten senselessly and starved to death, reclaiming his life by learning to read, write, and fighting back against slave masters. Pursuing a meaningful life by teaching other slaves to fight as well. It's a goddamn hero's journey, right? It's so beautiful. By pure luck, Douglass is sent back to Baltimore to stay with Thomas Ault, a previous master. Here Douglass, though weary and tired and demoralized, plots his escape. He makes contracts with his master and the ship workers to make his own money, save a bit, and plan his escape from slavery. And here Douglass touches on something important which we can all empathize with: the anxiety of freedom. I endured all the evils of a slave and suffered all the care and anxiety of a freeman. I found it a hard bargain. But hard as it was, I thought it was better than the old mode of getting along. It was a step towards freedom to be allowed to bear the responsibilities of a freeman, and I was determined to hold on upon it. I bent myself to the work of making money. I was ready to work at night as well as day, and by the most untiring perseverance and industry, I made enough to meet my expenses and lay up a little money every week. One thing Sartre constantly brings up is that we are condemned to freedom. We are burdened with the weight of our choices, and this is harrowingly true. It's a heavy load, the truth that we are responsible for our lives, right? Oftentimes I tear up about it, getting overwhelmed, overthinking about what I should do with my short existence and measly time on earth. I contemplate and ruminate and walk around with my brow furrowed like some boy lost in his own mind. And to be truthful, I think that's the human condition. But I could promise you one thing. Though freedom is burdensome, as Douglass remarks, it's rewarding. It's far better to choose one's own life and bear the cost of it than to have it be thrown on you. Soon after, Douglass escapes the South and ventures to the North. He doesn't describe how, in order to avoid exposing his route, but he does describe the feeling of escape. And this explains why the burden of freedom is so fucking worthwhile. This is why it's awesome to be human. I have been frequently asked how I felt when I found myself in a free state. I've never been able to answer the question with any satisfaction to myself. It was a moment of the highest excitement I ever experienced. I suppose I felt as one may imagine the unarmed mariner to feel when he is rescued by a friendly man of war from the pursuit of a pirate. In writing to a dear friend, immediately after my arrival at New York, I said I felt like one who had escaped a den of hungry lions. My friends, there was immense suffering in taking control of one's life, but there is immense satisfaction too. Nietzsche remarked that man's achievement is as far as his suffering. The heights he gets to is proportionate to the valleys he descends into. And Jordan Peterson says something quite similar.
I believe that the evidence suggests that the light that you discover in your life is proportionate to the amount of the darkness that you're willing to forthrightly confront, and that there's no necessary upper limit to that. So I think that the good that people are capable of is actually, it's a higher good than the evil that people are capable of. And believe me, I do not say that lightly, given what I know about the evil that people are capable of. And I believe that the central psychological message of the biblical corpus fundamentally is that's why it culminates in some sense with the idea that it's necessary to adopt, it's necessary to confront the devil and to accept your, what would you say, the unjustness of your tortured mortality. If you can do that, it's a challenge, as you just pointed out, that's sufficient to challenge even God himself, that you have the best chance of transcending it and living the kind of life that will set your house in order and everyone's house in order at the same time.
After throwing off his chains, reveling in the beauty of freedom in New Bedford, Frederick Douglass became the chief editor and writer at The Liberator, an abolitionist newspaper that spearheaded the anti-slavery movement. He went on to write, speak, and hold debates that brought slavery down and blacks up in the U.S., cementing himself as a true American hero. And thus concludes the incredible life and high agency of Frederick Douglass. And before we wrap up, let's just recount the major lessons of Douglass's life. First, man must carve his own fate, right? Douglass is the definition of high agency. He refused to let circumstances bar him and moved forward despite all the beatings, hunger gnawing at his soul, and the horrors he encountered. And I think Douglass said it best. A man is worked upon by what he works upon. He may carve out his circumstances, but his circumstances carve him out as well. This is a classic Stoic teaching. Life happens for you, not to you. Amor fati. Next up, struggle is necessary, and we cannot become great without it. So we must take the path that requires resistance. Without struggle, nothing worthwhile is accomplished. If things were easy, everyone would do them. Douglass's escape from slavery came from acting, not fantasizing or philosophizing about freedom. If you want something, you will have to create it yourself. As Douglass said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom yet depreciate agitation are those who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want ocean without the roar of its water. The struggle may be a moral one, it may be a physical one, or it may be both. But it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without demand. It never did, and it never will. And lastly, freedom is always a choice. Douglass is a motherfucking fighter. His actions to fight back against the slave owners, to run away, to learn to read and write and organize movements, and his willingness to be in public even though he was hunted as a fugitive slave. All of this showed Douglass had no care for his chains, for his circumstances, and instead saw them as an opportunity to create his own essence, to transcend his facticity, to craft his fate, and to change the world. He was a man of freedom and not of bad faith. And now that we've recounted some of the major lessons, let's look to some action steps that we too can take in our own life. Number one, we must find something that seduces us. For Douglass, it was language, reading and writing and literature. For me, I think it's storytelling. And for you, it might be something completely different. But here's my recommendation for finding your passion or life's task. Number one, increase your surface area for luck by just trying out a bunch of things. Whether it's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or drawing or playing guitar. You only figure out what you like by first figuring out what you really don't like. So look to your childhood to see what resonated. For me, film and cinema, science fiction and fantasy novels, and all those stories really stuck with me. Check out Robert Greene and Mastery for more commentary on finding your life's work. In addition, you've got to study the greats. Find a biography or documentary or an interview with someone you admire. Check it out. See if you like it. Study their path. Study the path of their path. Study, study, study. Nearly all great creators or entrepreneurs or, high agency people study their world. Quentin Tarantino is so obsessed with past filmmakers that he's basically got Brian De Palma's life memorized, and Steve Jobs sought counsel from Andy Grove, the CEO of Intel, and was a huge fan of Edwin Land, the inventor of Polaroid. For me, I love listening to the Founders Podcast and How to Take Over the World, and I highly recommend those to really learn about the great creators and entrepreneurs of history. And finally, as our last action step, learn to communicate your story. Douglass was effective as an abolitionist, writer, orator, and an American hero because he was an incredible speaker. He had confidence and gusto. He could speak to the experience as a former slave, related to this to the audience, and gave them something to really chew on. So, my friends, learn to communicate your unique story and carve a spot for yourself. Persuasion is the ultimate skill. It teaches you how to inspire and motivate others at the same time communicating your own value. Whether you're pitching your latest novel, commanding a Fortune 500 company, or simply talking to a friend, persuasion is sure to help. I think it's time to wrap up this monster of a video. So, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you. You just listened to some 21-year-old idiot ramble on for almost like an hour about Jean-Paul Sartre and Frederick Douglass and all these lofty ideas of achieving your dreams. And I hope it resonated, or at least it was entertaining maybe. But, you know, the only person who controls your life is you. And I think this is a theme I'll constantly talk about, I'll constantly bring back, and something I'm trying to figure out in my own life. So if you're someone who you want to achieve great things, who you want to maybe live in a fancy house, or help the children in Africa, or make cool movies, or just paint cool shit that you enjoy, whatever it is that you want to do, if you just want to live a meaningful, happy life, then I don't know what to say other than you've got to take control of it. You've got to stop making excuses and start living your fucking life. And I want you to know that as I'm saying you and looking at you across the screen, I'm also looking at myself in the camera screen folded out so I can see myself. Because when I talk about you taking control of your life, I also mean me. Thank you so much for watching. I love you. Take care. Feel free to comment and message me on Instagram or Twitter, preferably Twitter. And have a great day, y'all. Thank you so much. I love you. And make someone else's day better today.